If you were here last week, you'll remember that my sermon last week was a complete and utter failure.
What? You didn't go to sleep.
Yeah, because I said at the beginning that my goal was to put you all to sleep.
And then,
As far as I know, nobody actually fell asleep during my sermon. Oh well, you can't win them all.
Are you going to try again this week?
I'm not going to try again this week, no. But if you want to sleep this week to make up for last week, I suppose that would be okay. Peace Sunday. It hasn't been feeling like a very peaceful week this week. It just seemed like everything that I heard on the news and stuff was just sort of going the wrong direction. But instead of trying to tell you all things that you already know, I thought I would tell you something that, at least I know. And so I want to focus this morning just on the passage that was read from the book of Deuteronomy. Because I think it's an interesting place to start this work on peace. So the book of Deuteronomy says that it's the speech of Moses. Okay, so Abraham, so if we think about, if we think back into our map here of this being Israel, and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they all live in the land of Israel, and things are more or less going okay, although they're not in charge, but that's fine. And then there's the whole famine thing, and Joseph's already in Egypt. So if we think about our mental map, Egypt is sort of out the back door and way over there somewhere. And so Joseph is back over there, and so they all go and join Joseph in Egypt because there's food in Egypt and no food up in Israel. And then, there's a change of regime in Egypt, things go badly, and slaves, and let my people go, and Moses, so then they go wandering through the desert, back there in the desert, and they come to the edge of the promised land. They come up this way to the edge of the promised land, and God says, Moses, you can't go in. Exact reason why Moses can't go in is a little bit fuzzy, but anyway, Moses did something wrong, and God says, you can't go into the promised land. So Moses has this big final speech to the people, which sort of is what Deuteronomy says it is, This is his big final, this is the stuff you're supposed to be doing. As scholars, however, we tend to look at Deuteronomy very differently. So Deuteronomy, from a scholarship perspective, isn't this prospective looking forward to when we are in the land. It's actually retrospective, So the people come into the land, There's the time of the judges, there's the time of the kings, and then there's all these invasions coming up from the north here. They're coming down, invading the land over and over and over again, and finally they go off to Babylonian captivity, and then they come back again, and that's probably actually when the book of Deuteronomy at least gets to the form we have it today. Sometime, probably during Persian rule, maybe Babylonian. Some people go, oh, that's actually till the Greeks, So we have this sort of 1,000-year span. Sometime during this 1,000 years, Deuteronomy was written. But we're going to go and sort of say, this is the people of Israel looking back on their history of kingship and saying, what went wrong? Because clearly the fact that the Babylonians came and invaded God's land and took away God's people in captivity is a bad sign. It's a sign that something went wrong. If you're in a battle and you lose, that's generally seen as a bad sign. Something went wrong. So here's the people of Israel looking back on their history, and they sort of write the book of Deuteronomy saying, okay, here's what we should have done. So I'm in Deuteronomy 17, verse 14. So for those of you, again, who are new or who haven't been paying attention over the last 20 years, there's always a stack of Bibles back there on the table. So if you get to church and you say, oh no, I forgot my Bible at home, you could even do that now. So anyway, here we are. When you have come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possession of it and settled in it, you say, I will set a king over me. So the first thing to remember on Peace Sunday is that war is made by leaders. War is not made by soldiers. Soldiers do the war thing, right? But the actual starting of the war and the continuing of the war is done by leaders. And we need to remember that because we're in Remembrance Day. There's all this stuff about thank a soldier and thank people for their service, and that's all great. But I think it's a deliberate attempt to take our eyes away from the fact that all of these soldiers have been horribly misused by their leadership. Right? That so many of the recent wars are not a result of the soldiers making mistakes, but the leaders sending them off to places that nobody even had a clue what the goal was. And so we as peace people need to keep our focus on not blaming the soldiers for stuff that happened because they just did what they were told. So the people of Israel, and when we think about this, because as far as Israel is concerned, basically the king has one job, and that's making war. That's his task. Later, all that stuff gets tacked onto it, but basically, as far as Israel is concerned, that's why they wanted a king to begin with, is that they wanted a king so that they could win some more of their wars. Okay, so, and the people of Israel say, I will set a king over me like the nations that are all around me. This should be a big flashing red light, if you know your Bible at all, because generally in the Bible, anytime somebody does something to be like the other nations around me, this is always a bad thing. Because Israel is supposed to be a different people. They're supposed to be not like everybody else. So the moment they say, we want to be like everybody else, right? The writers of the Bible go, anytime we tried to do that, that was a mistake. So God says, okay, if you really want a king, you can pick one. Well, actually, no, I'm going to pick one for you. Right? So one whom the Lord will choose, one of your own community, is the way my translation reads. Which is sort of a generous translation, because the Hebrew reads one from among your brothers. And it's a little reminder in here of how much work the Bible goes to not let you think about women leadership. Right? The Bible sort of works really hard at just sort of not even wanting you to think about women leadership. Right? So that, while a king is naturally male, and it has to be male because he's a king. Right? You can't be a female and a king. So therefore, if you want a king, you have to have a male, and it's all nice and simple. We don't have to think about this anymore. Right? There's even like a woman in Second Kings who ruled, but she's not called a queen. She's just the woman who ruled, which is the same word in Hebrew. So she kinged. But she, of course, wasn't a queen anyway, right? So they, like they had a lot of good ideas, and there were some places they just weren't going to go, right? So one from your own community, no foreigners. Okay, even so, right? So once you have this king, he may not acquire horses for himself. Now in Israel, horses basically had one use. And that was for making war. In our tradition, horses had lots of uses, right? Here, especially you get onto the prairies, and horses are great for transportation, right? All of the many, many thousands of people who crossed this great land, either on horseback or being pulled by horses. Israel looks a lot more like West Virginia, and horse-drawn vehicles don't work very well in West Virginia because it's all like this, and there's rocks and there's trees, and if you don't have a road, it's sort of tricky. Right? And in our traditions, again, horses were often used for pulling plows, and Israel used oxen for pulling plows and donkeys and things like that. So basically, horses had one use, and that was for the military. So this is such a remarkable idea. Israel, for hundreds and hundreds of years, had been invaded. They'd been invaded by the Babylonians, and before that they were invaded by the Assyrians, and before that they were invaded by the Arameans, and before that they were invaded by the Moabites and the Edomites, and there was always the threat of the Egyptians. And so like everybody else is sort of up here and over here, and then the Egyptians are way down there. And in fact, most of the time, the only reason that Israel got invaded is because those people out there were worried about the Egyptians, or the Egyptians were worried about those people out there, and so they sort of met in Israel, and, right? But in all of this battle, in all of this history of warfare and warfare and warfare, and the conclusion they came to at the end of all this is, you know what? We spent too much money on weapons. Think about that. Here we are, in this absolutely secure nation, right? The Canadians are not thinking about invading. The Mexicans are not thinking about invading. Nobody's thinking about invading us, right? There might be the occasional, person who's going to fly a plane into something, but otherwise, we are about as secure as you can be in a nation, and we haven't been invaded. Well, I guess since the Canadians did it, right, last. I don't know, maybe the Mexican Wars can count, I don't know. You guys know your history better than I do, right? But, and still, we go, anytime there's a problem, oh, well, we throw more money at the military. Right? More. We don't know what it's for, but they can't keep track of it all, right? But it doesn't matter, whatever the problem is, we're going to throw money at the military. Israel, on the other hand, invasion, threats of invasion, right? And then civil war for, sort of in this ongoing process. And they conclude, we spent too much money on the military. Kings shouldn't do that. What a remarkable conclusion. They go, that's the will of God. Just like all of this stuff on war, somehow we should have done this differently. And they don't go into a lot of detail about exactly what they think they should have done differently, but not that. Whatever the alternative was for the mess of their history, building up more weapons was not their answer. I just find that so remarkable. Right? So, he must not acquire many horses for himself, right? Verse 16, or to return the people to Egypt in order to acquire more horses, since the Lord has said you must not, right? So the other alternative that kept occurring to Israel, besides like building up more weapons, is, well, we got all of this problems from them people over there. We've got another huge territory in the Egyptians just over there. Maybe we should ask them to help. Maybe we should ask them to send some soldiers our way, right, so that they can save us from those guys. And God says, no, not that either. Right? Going to one enemy to help to save you from another enemy does not save you. Right? The enemy of your enemy is not your friend. The enemy of your enemy is still your enemy too. And so, right, so the two most obvious things that would occur to us as possible solutions for Israel's ongoing problems, Israel says that God said, no, that's not the way we do things. That's not the way the people of God act. Don't do that. You must never return that way again. Because there's lots and lots of lessons in your history, and maybe if it hasn't been working, you should stop doing it. Which, sort of seems obvious on the surface, except that we tend not to do it. So then, verse 17, and he must not acquire many wives for himself. Which is, of course, what Solomon gets blamed for most often, although it's not true. But anyway, right? When we think about acquiring wives for himself in this context, we're actually not talking about how many wives he has. The purpose of the king having wives is to make deals with neighboring nations. Right? So the king goes and makes a deal with the Moabites over here, and he says, okay, look, we're going to be on the same team. Right? We're going to form an alliance, and the way we cement our alliance is I'll take your daughter for my wife, and I'll give you my daughter for your wife, and that sort of, is a way of signing a covenant between the two of us. So again, right, what we have here is not really concerned about women, but a concern about making alliances with your neighbors. And I'm never sure about this one, because I'm a big fan of, like making friends when you can. Right? Sort of like, aren't you always stronger together than you are separate? But Israel's very clear that no, we're going to do this on our own. We are a separate people. We're different than everybody else. And I'm not sure about this one.
You wouldn't give your daughter.
Well, and I wouldn't give my daughter to someone else if they were, I probably wouldn't do that either. So he must not acquire many wives for himself, or else his heart will be turned away, right? Because you make too many alliances and suddenly you start thinking like them people over there. Also, silver and gold he must not acquire in great quantity for himself. So it's really, really, really important for your ruler not to get wealthy on this. Right? Because the king is supposed to be basically just like everybody else. He's got a task, and that's to maintain peace. Later on, he acquires an additional task, which is to be on the side of the poor. And all of that works together, and you can't be on the side of the poor if you're simply too far away from them and you don't understand their lives. It's just about that simple. So then the rest of the verses are all about keeping the law in front of himself. That whatever else he does, he's got to keep this book in front of himself and keep doing this. Because in Israel, the king was always beneath the law, was always under the law. The law had first priority. The king didn't get to change the law. The king didn't get to interpret the law, because that was the job of somebody else. The king didn't make the law. So I just find this so remarkable, that these people who had been abused and threatened and invaded and killed and slaughtered came to this conclusion. This is the way we want our leadership to act. This is our way forward. So what is our way forward? I mean, here we are, and we're not in Israel, and we are in a remarkably different place. And yet, in so many ways, these old words still challenge us. Because Jesus comes along and he picks out bits and pieces of this. He picks out bits and pieces of the Old Testament and says, no, these places were the places where God was really evident. Right? Not slaughter your enemies. Somehow we misunderstood God in the slaughter your enemies thing. And here we are to, right, one step, and then Jesus, of course, is going to crank it up another step and go, love your enemies. And we go, wow, we aren't even near there yet. But maybe we can encourage our leaders to take the first step. Right? Can we at least get to Deuteronomy even if we can't get to Jesus? Can we at least start there? So this week, I encourage you to take a small step and to reach out to your leaders, right? Phone somebody, right? Write a letter to somebody, and say, can we take a small step toward peace and away from, let's face it, insanity, and try to actually make peace rather than just getting all excited about creating more war. Amen.